Welcome to Wisdom of the World. Today I'm going to tell a story from the Sudan. It's about when you feel really low and you don't know what to do next. And the story is called The Eye Will See What It Is Destined to See. And it goes like this. Once upon a time in Sudan, there was a father who had two daughters. One was a bit of a shallow girl, nice enough, and she was very good at pleasing her father, so her father would always buy things for her. And the second daughter was very kind-hearted and very thoughtful. And the father always tried to do things for his daughter. He had plenty of money to support them, and he would often ask the daughters what he could get them, and the oldest daughter always had something, and the other daughter just always said to him, "The eye will see what it is destined to see, Father." And she would always answer this, whatever he said. And then he just got so fed up with that answer. So at a certain moment he says, really, he burst out, and in a fit, a bout of anger, he says, "We will see what your eye will see next." And he opened the door, and there was just a beggar standing there who wanted to beg. And he says, "Go with this beggar. Beggar, take this girl." And he closed the door. The beggar said through the door, I can hardly feed myself. How could I feed somebody else? The father didn't say a word. And the beggar looked around to see what the girl would do, but she didn't say anything, and so he left and she just followed him. And he was leading a donkey, and he said, "Maybe you want to sit on the donkey," because he felt sorry for her. And she says, no, I will just walk. And so together they walked and they begged. And he could not help but notice that together with her, people were much more generous to him. They would give him a piece of bread, some milk, sometimes some fish, sometimes some dates, some figs. And after a while, after they'd been walking for quite a while, he would spread out a blanket and put all the food, and he says, "Please eat and get strong." And she wouldn't eat. She says, "I will only eat if you eat, and when we eat, we split everything half. We share." So the beggar was sort of touched by this kindness of the girl and fairness also. And they journeyed on and on and on. At a certain moment came to another town, but he saw that she was really tired, and so he walked up to a little hilltop, and he said, "Please sit there and rest." And he put also the donkey there to graze. And then he says, "I'm going to come back in the evening, and I'm going to check out this town. It looks quite prosperous. Let me check it, I'll come back." And so the girl was quite happy because her feet were hurting, and it had been a tiring day, and so she eventually fell asleep. And then she was woken up by a lot of noise because the donkey had gotten free, had freed himself from the stake that he was tied up to. And the girl woke up, ran after him, and took a stone to hit the peg with which the donkey was tied deeper in. But then one hit on the stone, and she must have chosen a really soft spot, she thought, because up, down the stick went, and she was curious, and she grabbed her hand in the sand, in the soil, in the soft soil, but she couldn't find the stick anywhere, and she reached deeper and deeper, and then she found something hard, which after quite some work she managed to pull up. And she saw it was a huge, big jar. And when she cut off the head of the jar, it was full of gold and silver and jewelry. And she couldn't believe it. She'd never seen such riches. And she covered, she was sitting on a cloth, she covered the cloth over it, and she waited for the beggar to return. And he came home and he says, "This is a very nice town. And because I got quite a lot of, let's share the food." So they did, they shared the food, and they sat, and she hadn't really said very much. And he was quite in a good mood because he says, "You'll see tomorrow when we go begging, this is a good town." And then she said to him, "What would you do if you all of a sudden had 1,000, let's say, dollars?" And he said, "Oh, then I would feed a beggar for 1 whole year," he said immediately. And then she said, "What if you had found 2,000? And she says, 2 people. And so what if it was much more? What if you found $5,000? And he said, "Well, then I would go to the mosque and feed all the beggars that had come there for every day 1 week, per week, for a whole year." And she says, "And what if it was much more than that? You know, if you had found 10, 20, 100 times more than that?" It took the beggar a while to answer, and in the end he says, "I would build a home for all the beggars from all over, for everybody to come and eat and sleep and rest and wash their feet that are tired from walking from the sand and the mud." She liked that idea. She clicked, she nodded. And she said, "Do you swear to Allah," this is Sudan, "that you would do this if this would ever happen to you?" And he says, "Yes, I would. But where am I ever, how is this ever going to become real?" And then she lifted up the cloth, and there was all these riches. And she says, "That's how." And she said, wait a minute, you found this is yours. You are actually a rich woman now. You can get any suitor. This has nothing to do with me." And she said, and she talked to him, but he was not convinced. But she said to him, "I want to build a home for beggars with you together. We will share that. We will do that together." And he says, "No, you can get any man that you want. Why would you want to hang out with a beggar?" And she says, "It's Allah. Allah makes beggars to rich men and rich men to beggars. It's up to him. Who am I to say anything? There's no difference in front of the eyes of Allah. All of us are beggars." Slowly, the man agreed, and the next morning they went down to the village and ate whatever they could eat, and they bought whatever they could buy, and then they went to the mayor's house, and they said, "We want to buy that hill out there. And the mayor quoted a very high price, but the guy didn't bargain, just bought it and walked out as the owner of that hill. And then, when there's money, things will happen. So they built a huge home, a big house called the Beggar's Home. And it was a heaven for any beggars who walked in those parts of the world. Now, what happened to the father and the other daughter? Well, the other daughter eventually got married, but she didn't find happiness because she couldn't have any children. And the father, after he had kicked out the daughter and left her with the beggar, slowly his fortunes also began to go down and down and down, and things were not going well for him. In the end, he had to ask help from his other daughter. The other daughter says, "Okay, well, what I can do is I can give you a bed here and I can feed you every day." But he felt treated like a beggar by his daughter, and he says, if I'm going to be a beggar, I'd rather beg myself. So he set out on the road, and he walked for days and days because he wanted to make sure that nobody would recognize him. Then he fell in with another group of beggars, and they all say, "Oh, we're going to the beggar's home." And he had never heard of it, but he joined them happily. Now, our beggar friend, the one who went with his daughter, saw him coming, and whispered to the daughter who had by then become his wife, and they had many children, many sons and daughters, that her father was coming. And so she immediately prepared a big fest for him and invited him to come. And he looked around and he didn't recognize his daughter because she was wearing a veil and she was surrounded by all these kids. And he looked at the party and he says, I never believed that I would set eyes on such a feast again. And then she said, the eye will see what it is destined to see, Father. Thus, telling him who she was. And the father felt terribly ashamed of what he had done, and all that he could think of was to run away. But the daughter would not let him and says, Father, I have told my children about their grandfather. And now that he is here, I will not let him go ever again. Yeah. And so it came to pass that, the daughter the evil that was done to the daughter was basically repaid with good. And also she did not have to judge her father in front of him. Now, why am I telling you this story? Because there's a lot of people that feel quite low and depressed and don't know what to do next, or even outcasts. Well, just like the girl in the story, be kind, be good, and good things will happen to you. Don't blame. Take responsibility. Any comments on this story or any suggestions for any story, for any other story? I'm always happy to hear them. Thank you.